the darkness that swallowed the North Atlantic during the nights of May 4th and 5th, 1943, seemed to stretch endlessly across the horizon. It was a heavy, oppressive darkness, the kind that blurs the boundary between sea and sky, where even seasoned watch officers strain their eyes trying to distinguish one from the other. But beneath that vast, black shroud, something monumental was unfolding. More than 40 German submarines, the feared U-boats, were silently converging like expertly trained predators closing in on a wounded herd. Their target, Convoy Ons-5, a slow and vulnerable formation of 43 merchant ships, carrying the lifeblood of Britain's survival from Liverpool to Halifax. The escort group knew they were outmatched. They had only 16 escort vessels spread thin across a huge defensive screen, facing what their intelligence estimated as 30 or more U-boats already shadowing them, with additional submarines racing toward the scene every hour. To the German commanders, the situation looked almost too perfect. Everything suggested this would be yet another massacre, another triumph reinforcing the dominance they had held over the Atlantic for years. Yet, on that specific night, the tide would turn in a way no one had foreseen. What was about to begin would mark the beginning of the end of U-boat supremacy. The assault on ONS-5 did not begin with explosions or torpedoes, but with a quiet sighting. On April 28, U-650 spotted the convoy roughly 400 nautical miles south of Greenland. The encoded message, transmitted through the icy ether back to the German command centers in Paris, made its way to the desk of Admiral Karl Dönitz, mastermind of the U-boat strategy. Without hesitation, he ordered every available submarine in the region to converge on the convoy's path. The Wolfpacks began to form Wolfpack Star and Wolfpack Fink, a combined force of 43 submarines, one of the largest groupings unleashed during the entire war. For 3 long years, the U-boats had reigned supreme in the Atlantic. Surfacing under the cover of night, they were essentially invisible to British radar. They were faster than most escort ships, capable of maneuvering ahead of convoys, choosing their angles, attacking in coordinated waves. In March 1943 alone, the U-boats sank 82 Allied ships, totaling 476,000 tons, the worst month for Allied shipping in the entire conflict. British leadership openly discussed the horrifying possibility of defeat should the trend continue. Fuel reserves were critical. Food stores had reached emergency levels. There was genuine fear the island nation could starve into submission. Meanwhile, the U-boat fleet had never been stronger. By May 1943, Germany possessed 240 operational submarines, with 118 already at sea. Shipyards were producing 20 new U-boats every month, while losses barely reached half that number. The math was brutally simple. If Germany continued sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them, Britain was doomed. But beneath the surface of events, something had changed, something profound, invisible, and completely unknown to German command. In April, the Allies had destroyed 15 submarines, a sharp spike but not enough to cause panic. German officers attributed the losses to improved Allied aircraft coverage and incremental tactical refinements. Nothing indicated that a revolution in detection technology had already taken place. The first to sense something was wrong was Commander Werner Hank of U-515, one of Germany's most skilled and decorated submarine aces. Between 1942 and 1944, he sank 23 ships, totaling more than 140,000 tons. In late April 1943, he executed a devastating attack on convoy TS-37, sinking 7 ships in just 12 hours, an extraordinary achievement that earned him oak leaves to his Knight's Cross. But during that very attack, his most successful, something inexplicable happened. A British destroyer appeared seemingly out of nowhere on the horizon. The Metox radar detector, designed to warn U-boats about Allied radar emissions, remained completely silent. No signal, no pulse, nothing. The destroyer materialized as if it had emerged from thin air and opened fire almost instantly. Hank barely escaped, diving at full speed. In his logbook, he wrote a disturbing observation. Enemy radar appears to operate at wavelengths for which the Metox gives no warning. Technical teams inspected the device once the submarine returned to port. They found no malfunction. The Metox worked perfectly, capable of detecting Allied radars with wavelengths of 1.5 meters, the standard for years. The official explanation was human error, likely the operator failing to notice a weak signal in the chaos of battle. Hank disagreed, and he was not alone. Other commanders began reporting the same unnerving pattern: British ships appearing without detection, aircraft finding U-boats in pitch-black nights with uncanny precision, depth charge attacks landing with unprecedented accuracy. By early May, German intelligence had documented 17 such incidents, all displaying the same alarming characteristics. The Allies were detecting U-boats with a level of precision that defied all known technology. Yet, nothing in German intelligence reports suggested any breakthrough. No new radar device had been recovered from shot-down aircraft. No captured equipment hinted at major advancements. Intercepted communications revealed nothing unusual. But the truth was staggering. On March 17, 1943, the British deployed their first ASV Mark III radar. Powered by the revolutionary cavity magnetron, a device capable of generating microwaves at 10 centimeter wavelengths, far beyond the detection capabilities of the METOX. Germany was, quite literally, blind, and they did not know it. The impact of the ASV Mark III radar was nothing short of revolutionary, and yet the Germans remained completely unaware of its existence. While the METOX system detected the long meter-band radar pulses of earlier British sets, the new microwave emissions from the cavity magnetron were utterly invisible. The U-boats, sailing confidently on the surface at night, had no idea that Allied aircraft could now spot them with astonishing clarity from miles away, even in total darkness. The consequences of this hidden shift were immediate and devastating. Aircraft from long-range patrol groups began attacking U-boats with an efficiency that German commanders could not explain. Submarines that once cruised safely through shadowed expanses were suddenly ambushed with surgical precision. Crews reported hearing the roar of engines overhead only seconds before bombs and depth charges rained down upon them. Still, no one in Berlin grasped the magnitude of what was happening. Meanwhile, convoy ONS-5 plowed slowly through the icy swells of the North Atlantic, unaware that it had become the focus of one of the greatest E-boat concentrations ever assembled. The merchant captain's men, who often had little more than civilian nautical training, stood tense at their bridges. For them, these waters were a graveyard. They knew the stories: convoys torn apart, ships split in half by torpedoes, survivors left freezing in rafts as flames danced across oil-covered seas. The escorts, too, were under no illusions. Each captain was acutely aware of their responsibility. 43 ships depended on their ability to fend off an attack that could come from any direction, at any time. The Admiralty had learned many painful lessons in the early war years, improving tactics, formations, and communication. But the U-boats remained deadly. The wolf packs had grown in number. Their commanders were experienced, many with dozens of kills to their names, and the vastness of the ocean favored the hunters. As April shifted into May, the tension aboard the escort vessels escalated. The weather deteriorated, bringing fierce winds and heavy seas. Sailors clung to rails to avoid being washed overboard. Radar operators fought to keep their screens clear through sheets of rain. The convoy crawled forward at barely 7 knots, its formation constantly disrupted by the pounding swell. It was under these brutal conditions that the U-boats began to encircle ONS-5. On May 3rd, the first signs of danger appeared. A long-range aircraft reported shadows, indistinct contacts trailing the convoy. Hours later, HFDF high-frequency direction, finding stations aboard the escorts, detected multiple brief but distinct U-boat radio transmissions. The wolfpacks were closing in. Commander Peter Gretton, the officer leading the escort group, gathered his officers and laid out the grim reality. They would be outnumbered, outgunned, and attacked relentlessly, but they would not break. Many of his men would later recall that speech, remembering the calm determination in his eyes. Gretton was not a man prone to fear. He understood the stakes. If ONS-5 fell, the morale blow to the Allies would be catastrophic. Even worse, the loss of supplies could cripple Britain's ability to continue the war. Night fell hard on May 4th. The sea roared like a living creature. Winds howled across the decks, and the convoy stretched out in a long, vulnerable line, a silhouette of darkness moving across an even darker sea. Then, close to midnight, the wolfpacks struck. 3 U-boats positioned ahead of the convoy surfaced nearly simultaneously. Their commanders coordinated through ultra-short transmissions, guiding each other toward their prey. The first torpedo slammed into a Norwegian freighter, the ship erupting into a fireball that illuminated the waves for miles. Seconds later, another ship was hit amidships, its hull shattering under the explosive force. Panic rippled through the line as sailors shouted positions into the storm. Destroyers surged forward, engines roaring as they pursued faint radar contacts through blinding rain. Depth charges thundered across the water, their blasts echoing like rolling thunder. But the U-boats were cunning. Many dived deep, slipping below thermal layers that distorted sonar readings. Others raced ahead on the surface, using the high seas as cover. Yet, something unexpected began happening, something that would alter the shape of the entire engagement. Every time a U-boat tried to surface to attack, aircraft appeared with unnatural speed. Flares lit up the skies. Searchlights sliced through the darkness. Radar-directed attacks began pounding the U-boats long before they could maneuver into proper firing positions. The Germans were stunned. Their METOX detectors remained silent, giving no warning of the approaching aircraft. Commanders began wondering if the Allies had developed a new tactic, or worse, a new weapon. One of the first U-boats to fall victim to this unseen enemy was U-638. Attempting to close in on the rear of the convoy, it surfaced briefly to recharge its batteries. Within minutes, a plane from Coastal Command spotted it through cloud cover, guided directly by ASV Mark III radar. Depth charges exploded around the submarine, tearing open its pressure hull. U-638 sank with all hands, disappearing into the black depths. Other U-boats suffered similar fates. Although none understood why, they were being detected faster, tracked more accurately, and attacked more often than ever before. But the Wolfpacks did not relent. During the early hours of May 5th, the attack escalated into a full-scale battle. At least 13 U-boats attempted to penetrate the convoy's defenses simultaneously. Torpedoes streaked through the water like phantom blades. Ships maneuvered wildly, some narrowly avoiding destruction, others not so fortunate. The British freighter Bristol City was struck just after 2 a.m. Its boilers exploded, sending debris flying high into the stormy night. The crew abandoned ship as flames engulfed the decks. A few hours later, the American vessel North Britain suffered a direct hit, splitting open and sinking rapidly. Escorts were pushed to their limits. Crews worked until exhaustion blurred their vision. Depth charge racks emptied faster than they could be replenished. Lookouts battled freezing winds. Sonar operators remained glued to their headphones, listening for the faintest echo of a submarine trying to slip beneath the formation. And still, the U-boats kept coming. But beneath the chaos, something had shifted. The newly empowered Allied forces, now unknowingly backed by revolutionary radar, were discovering that they could fight back with unprecedented effectiveness. The convoy was bleeding, but the Wolfpacks were bleeding too. The battle for ONS-5 was no longer just a hunt. It was becoming a turning point. By dawn on May 5th, the Atlantic looked like a battlefield from another world. Black smoke clung to the surface of the waves. Burnt oil streaked across the water in long, shimmering scars. The wreckage of shattered ships drifted aimlessly, creaking like ghosts in the wind. Exhausted sailors clung to life rafts, their bodies numbed by icy spray, watching helplessly as the convoy they had sailed with was torn apart by unseen enemies. But as the first pale light began to seep across the horizon, the balance of power subtly shifted. The storm that had plagued the convoy through the night now turned against the U-boats. Visibility improved. Radar screens hummed to life with greater clarity. Escorts regrouped. Aircraft were able to fly again. And with them came the full, unleashed potential of the ASV Mark III radar, the game-changer the Germans didn't even know existed. As the skies cleared, long-range B-24 Liberators emerged from the clouds like avenging spirits. They swept across the convoy's perimeter, their crews scanning the dark sea for the telltale silhouette of a conning tower. With precise radar guidance, they no longer needed moonlight or luck. They could find their prey through cloud, rain, and darkness alike. At 6:25, one such Liberator locked onto a faint radar echo. Beneath it lurked U-266, attempting to maneuver into position for another strike. Moments later, depth charges cascaded from the bomber's wings, plunging into the sea. Explosions ripped through the submarine's hull. The ocean swallowed it whole, leaving only a swirl of debris. For the first time, the Wolfpacks felt the unmistakable sting of a battlefield that had turned hostile. Meanwhile, aboard the escort leader, HMS Duncan, Commander Gretton analyzed the latest HFDF bearings. The Germans were communicating more frequently, a sign that they were growing desperate, attempting to coordinate attacks under rapidly worsening conditions. Every signal provided a clue, a breadcrumb pointing to the next Wolfpack position. Gretton seized the opportunity. He ordered all escorts capable of high speed to break off temporarily and sweep the surrounding quadrants in increasingly aggressive patterns. Instead of waiting defensively, they were now hunting. Destroyers raced across the waves, their engines thundering as they charged toward suspected submarine locations. Shortly after 9 o'clock, HMS Orreby acquired a sonar contact, faint but consistent. The destroyer veered sharply, bringing its weapons to bear. Depth charges thundered into the sea, churning the water into froth. Seconds later, an underwater explosion signaled a successful hit. Oil and debris floated to the surface. It was U-192, caught and destroyed. The hunters were becoming the hunted, but despite mounting losses, the remaining U-boat commanders refused to give up. Dinitz's doctrine stressed persistence. If a commander lost visual contact, he was to rejoin the Wolfpack and attack again. If conditions were poor, he was to wait. If escorts pushed him back, he was to reposition and strike from a new angle. The U-boats were trained to be relentless, and relentless they were. At 10:15, U-584 surfaced in a gap between escort patterns and fired 2 torpedoes toward the center of the convoy. The British freighter Ganges was struck. Flames engulfed the ship, forcing its crew to abandon it within minutes. The escorts dashed toward the source of the attack, but the submarine had already slipped beneath the waves. Minutes later, U-638, heavily damaged during earlier engagements, attempted a desperate final assault. It fired its last remaining torpedoes at a pair of straggling merchantmen. Both missed the sea's turbulence, throwing off their aim. The escorts pounced, unloading depth charges, until the crippled submarine broke apart. The tide had shifted again, this time decisively. By midday, the Wolfpacks were in disarray. Many U-boats were damaged. Others were running dangerously low on fuel or had expended their torpedoes. The storm that had provided them cover earlier now scattered them across the ocean. Communications fractured. Coordination failed. What had begun as one of the greatest U-boat concentrations of the war was dissolving into chaos, and still the Allies pressed their advantage. At 13:40, the American destroyer USS Forster detected another U-boat attempting to shadow the convoy from the north. With aircraft overhead providing continuous radar support, the destroyer was able to corner and destroy U-125 in a combined air-sea assault. Survivors attempted to abandon ship, but with the battle raging and risks too high, rescue was impossible. The submarine vanished beneath the waves. The losses mounted. 3 more U-boats, U-53, U-2, 386, and U-15, suffered heavy damage during the afternoon's pounding, forcing them to withdraw from the battle altogether. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the Wolfpacks had been reduced from an attacking armada to a battered, scattered remnant. The convoy had suffered grievous losses, yes, but it still sailed, and every hour fewer submarines remained to pursue it. Yet the true turning point came at dusk. As the sky faded to crimson, another formation of liberators arrived, extending the air shield even farther. Their radar operators identified yet another shadow stalking the convoy, U-630 prowling ahead and preparing for a daring surface attack. It was the kind of maneuver that had won countless victories for the Germans earlier in the war. But this time, everything was different. The Liberator dove toward the submarine with ruthless precision. Flares ignited the sky. Machine guns tore into the conning tower. Depth charges detonated along the U-boat's flank. A final explosion ruptured its pressure hull, sending it spiraling into the abyss. The message was unmistakable. The age of unchecked U-boat dominance was over. Night returned, but it no longer belonged to the Wolfpacks. The escorts maintained tight formation, radar active, sonar tuned, aircraft overhead whenever weather allowed. Every U-boat that dared approach was quickly detected and driven off. Many commanders, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, sent terse messages to Dönitz: damage sustained, batteries low, torpedoes expended, situation untenable. For the first time in the war, the hunters truly feared the hunted. As midnight approached, only a handful of submarines remained in fighting condition. The others were retreating, sinking, or drifting helplessly beneath the waves. The convoy, though battered, had endured the worst storm of torpedoes ever unleashed on it. and still it moved forward, inch by inch, towards safety. Ons-5 had not only survived, it was winning. As the words left his lips, the soldiers around him felt a shift, something subtle, yet unmistakable. Fear didn't vanish, but it receded just enough to let purpose take its place. The sound of distant artillery continued to rumble across the plains, the night sky flickering with flashes that illuminated their faces in brief, ghostly intervals. Heinrich looked at each of them, exhausted, trembling, hungry, and soaked in sweat, but he also saw a spark, the same spark that kept him alive through everything he had endured. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Weber's shoulder, grounding him, reminding him of the unspoken truth. They were still here, and as long as they were, they would fight together. "We have been through hell," Heinrich continued, his voice rising with a conviction he didn't know he could still summon. "We have marched through snow that froze men where they stood. We have fought battles that lasted longer than days should. We have carried our wounded, buried our dead, and faced enemies stronger and better supplied. Yet every single time, we endured, and tomorrow will be no different." A few men straightened their backs, another wiped his face with a shaking hand, and for the first time since the bombardments resumed, someone even nodded. Heinrich allowed them a moment, letting silence settle like a thin veil before he spoke again. "Remember this," he said, "courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is walking into the fire because someone beside you needs you to. You are not alone here. You fight with brothers." The wind carried the faint scent of burning fuel, drifting in waves as the sky continued to glow. A resounding explosion echoed from the distance, louder than the rest, followed by a rising column of flame. Some soldiers flinched, others clenched their jaws, but none stepped back. Heinrich turned toward the flickering horizon. "They think we'll break tonight," he said. "They think we're beaten, but they forget who we are. They forget what we've lived through. Tomorrow, they will see us stand. They will see that we do not fall quietly. And as long as one of us still draws breath, our line will hold." Weber exhaled slowly, some of the panic draining from his expression. He looked down at his shivering hands, then closed them with deliberate strength. "You really believe that?" he asked quietly. "I do," Heinrich replied, "because I believe in you." That simple sentence landed harder than any shouted command. It wasn't discipline or orders driving them now. It was trust, shared suffering, a bond forged in fire. Weber swallowed hard, the tremor in his voice fading. Then I won't let you down. I know you won't." Another wave of artillery thundered in the distance, but this time the men didn't collapse inward. They braced themselves, feet planted, bodies squared, as if rediscovering something they had forgotten, the strength that comes from standing shoulder to shoulder. Heinrich looked at them with quiet pride. "Get some rest. The dawn will demand everything from us." One by one, the soldiers dispersed, some returning to their dugouts, others sitting by the dim light of burning debris, cleaning their rifles with slow, deliberate movements. Their breaths fogged the cold air, but their resolve burned warmer than before. Weber remained for a moment beside Heinrich, staring at the glowing horizon. "Do you think the shelling will stop before morning?" Heinrich almost smiled, tired but sincere. "No, but we will still be here when it does." Weber nodded once, firmly this time, then walked away to join the others. Left alone, Heinrich inhaled deeply, letting the cold air steady his thoughts. He could feel the tremors of the earth beneath him, hear the distant churning of engines and metal, and sense the weight of what tomorrow would bring. But he also felt something else, something fragile, yet powerful. Hope. He picked up his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the dim outline of their defensive line. The night was long, and the firestorms ahead would only grow. But Heinrich faced them with a quiet, immovable resolve. Because in war, true strength was not measured by the absence of fear or the promise of victory. It was measured by the refusal to surrender. And Heinrich, like the men who followed him, would not surrender. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever.